Got Professor Stephen Jones coming up here in just a moment with us. I do want to tell you about one more of the sponsors that has made today's show possible, maybe several. Tend to not get to these till the end of the show, and they're so incredibly important. One of them is a Cola Blue. This is just an amazingly high-quality atmospheric water generator. Well, they got a whole line of them. They've got huge ones they sell to governments and militaries, but they have a small one for the home. Looks like a water cooler without the water bottle on top of it. It grabs water out of the air from panels in the back, puts it through 7 filters, including reverse osmosis and carbon, and then has a UV antibacterial light in the stainless steel tank inside. The Cola Blue 28 machine will allow you to get off the grid. You can even get solar panels. They sell a converter that goes with it that works just for their machine if you have solar. Very inexpensive to get that converter. Acolablue.com, ECOLOBLUE.com, Acolablue.com. Big banners up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Or give them a call at 800-691-6043, 800-691-6043. Acolablue.com, ladies and gentlemen. The atmospheric water generator for your home or office. Going now to Professor Stephen Jones, who 4 years ago, now, how time flies, went public. Stephen Jones, a retired professor of physics, has published papers in Scientific American, Nature, and Physical Review. Letters, his peer-reviewed papers on the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, all 3 of them, when only 2 were hit by airplanes, is being widely read and has been translated into Spanish, French, and Japanese. It's available at the Journal of 9/11studies.com, along with 26 other scholarly letters regarding the events of 9/11-2001. His ongoing research includes experiments with thermites, along with electron microscope energy, spectrographic analysis of dust and slag from the WTC. And we really appreciate him coming on. He's here today to debunk the debunkers who lied to Gage and said, oh, we're going to show you talking about this evidence, showed him a rough cut and said this will be in the show. They have transcripts of that now, proving it. They gave him the transcripts. This same group is known for doing hit pieces on, quote, conspiracy theorists. It's their specialty. Creative Differences is the name. And they also did this ridiculous thermite. I mean, I've seen thermite tests where they put a cup of it over on an engine block, and it melts right through in seconds. I've seen, but this thermite barely even sparked, but just for a few seconds, saying there were hundreds of pounds on it. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and then they acted like explosive thermite didn't exist, nanothermite, super thermite. I mean, this was crazy when we have all the patents and the rest of it. So I wanted to get Professor Stephen Jones on with us. Professor, it's great to have you.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be with you again here today.
Okay, briefly recap. Most people know who you are, but for those that don't, how you got into this, and then let's get into thermate, the different samples, what it shows, how it fits with the NIST report, fits with the firefighter testimony. Break it down, sir.
Okay, sure. Well, to begin, let me start with the Journal of 911 Studies that you mentioned. We now have over 100 papers and letters. So the list has grown dramatically. These are all peer-reviewed, and I encourage people to go there. Of course, we also have the papers that you mentioned in more established scientific journals, technical journals, civil engineering journal, and, of course, the Open Chemical Physics Journal has our latest paper with Niels Harrit, Jeff Ferrer, myself, and a total of 9 authors, I think. And so, let's see, my other phone was ringing, Alex, sorry.
That's okay, sir, go ahead.
But, so, yeah, it's been quite an adventure trying to explain to people the difference between nanothermite or superthermite, same thing there, compared to ordinary macrothermite. And I'll tell you, I explained that very carefully to the National Geographic people. And they did get some of that straight, but you just couldn't seem to bring it to admit that, here's a form of thermite, this nanothermite, that's distinctly different from ordinary thermite. And the nanothermite is explosive, can be tailored to be a high explosive, and they just didn't do it. And then, of course, this test they did, you mentioned that, where they piled up ordinary thermite. They didn't even put sulfur in it. That would have been interesting if they'd done at least that, which I talk about in my first paper. And you and I talked about thermate, which is the sulfur added to thermite, at some length, explaining the difference. And of course, the sulfur observed in samples of World Trade Center steel, observed by the guys at Worcester Polytechnic Institute and published. That great mystery, New York Times said, how did the sulfur get in the steel? Sorry, clearing my throat a little here, but so they didn't even add sulfur, and of course they didn't test nanothermite at all. And they kept saying, I just was reviewing that this morning, the Nat Geo program, and they kept saying, well, thermite is not explosive, will not explode. Well, excuse me, there is a form called nanothermite that will explode, and so they just totally obfuscated that important point. And I kept hammering that. They did quote me on that in the program briefly, but of course their test had nothing to do with what we're talking about in the nanothermite paper. Nothing whatsoever, no correlation at all. And I told them, I was really upset when I heard about that in March, that they're proposing this, we're not proposing, they'd already done the experiment. I called it pathetic. I said, this in no way represents my views to stack up a bunch of ordinary thermite around a steel column. I never said anything like that. We're talking about nanothermite in this paper, and thermate, which is sulfur added to thermite. It looks like that was also present. Good evidence for that with the sulfur in the World Trade Center steel sample. But to do it with ordinary thermite, and the way they did it, is just ludicrous. And of course, I told them it's a straw man argument. It's not. It supposedly represents my views, but in no way comes close to what I have stated.
Well, I want to get into the science with you, Professor, today. But first, did they hold out in a dishonest way to you in the way Richard Gage, who I think has the highest credibility? I mean, he doesn't like to get in fights, doesn't like to be nasty. He puts up with a lot of crap. He's a genteel person, scholarly like yourself. But, I mean, he said this was a complete lie, a complete deception, a complete fraud.
Well, I think that there are certainly some elements there that I would have to say that Nat Geo was disingenuous. I said, look, NIST just can't seem to admit that there is a form of thermite, nanothermite, that is explosive. I hope you can get that straight and tell the facts. This is what we're claiming now, is nanothermite was the main culprit here.
Oh, yeah, they say repeatedly they don't even know if it exists, even though you have all the patents and NASA uses it in missile separation. I mean, it just so happens the Pentagon has a lot, and their scientists just so happen to have those patents, and you got a bunch of NIST experts that are the few in the world on it, but no big deal.
Right. And, there's data published, as we quoted in our nanothermite paper. We published from Livermore National Laboratory, for example, Tillotson and Gash and those scientists, and they're publishing their data, and we compared our data with theirs for the differential scanning calorimeter. For example, the composition's the same as theirs. I mean, with as we mentioned, the very ultra fine iron and then aluminum. This is not something that happens as the building falls down to get this complex mix of ultra fine.
This is very exotic, and from sample after sample after sample, you find the same signature.
That's exactly right. And so for them to obscure all that, particularly after I was just pleading with Robert Erickson to please get this straight. NIST can't seem to admit it, but surely you can. That there's a difference between incendiary thermite and explosive nanothermite. There's a difference between night and day, and sure enough, they obscured it again. And so, yes, I must say that does seem disingenuous to me. I don't see how you can say it otherwise.
Well, I know you don't get into the Pentagon, but firing missiles into fiberglass chicken coops, and I recognize that's what it looked like out of a farm supply. fiberglass little thin thing and blowing it up with a pound of plastic explosive and saying a missile would have blown the whole Pentagon up. I mean, this was just, I mean, I was watching this and I couldn't believe it. And they would go, the science, the truthers. And they would, like, off the page, have it all crooked, the word truther, even on your name tags to make you look.
Right.
And they wouldn't have the camera shots as nice with you guys, but then with their experts, they would. I mean, it was, but we had History Channel do this to us.
Yeah.
They would do stuff like, I would give a speech to a standalone crowd of 600 people.
Yeah.
And then during a recess here in Austin, when they shot that, they would just show the bleachers while I was talking with like 3 people in them.